John Chege. I was born in a village called Chereta, and I lived in Chereta till I was around 5 years. And when I was 5 years, that Chereta, it was a village which was owned by our forefathers. And there came a time when there were big guys, rich people, who wanted to use the Chereta that our forefathers owned. And one night they came and evicted everybody who was living there. We were taken to another area, which is now Huruma, slum where I come from. And we were told to live there for a while as the matter proceeds in the court. That was back in the year 1979. And up to now, we are still living in Huruma. Huruma is at the northern side of Karura Forest. It's bordered by Runda at one side. The other side is Kiambu Road. And then we've been living there, and my community people have been depending on this forest. So when I was very young, we used to walk in this forest. We used to go fishing in the rivers which are in this forest. There is the Rwaka River and Karura River. And when we were just walking inside the forest, going fishing and sometimes collecting firewood, we could find very, very strange things inside the forest. We could find even dead bodies dumped in the forest. We could find other people who were carjacked and their clothes were removed and dumped in the forest. But because we are still young, we could not see it as a great thing. There were two young guys, a boy and a girl, who were carjacked one of the fine days. They were killed and then later dumped in the forest. In the year 1998, when Professor Wangari Maathai wanted now to come to Karura and plant trees, but during that time there were grabbers. During the former regime, there were grabbers who had bought Karura land, and they wanted to construct big mansionettes. They wanted to buy land to build houses there. And when Wangari wanted to come and demonstrate and plant trees, first of all, she could have first to evict the grabbers, and then she could be allowed to plant the trees. When she planned to come, the rivers were flooded and there were no bridges she could access through. The gates, entrances, there were no gates by then, but there were inlets to the forest, were manned by GSU personnel, so the professor could not be able to access to the forest. And because we were eager to conserve our forest, we crossed one of the rivers while carrying Wangari Maathai shoulder high, and later on we were in there planting trees. But when the GSU and the security personnel realized that Professor was planting trees in Karura, they came fighting us. They threw stones, and there was a security group which was formed by then. It was called Kausha, and that security group is the one of the guys who threw a stone which hit Professor Wangari Maathai on her head.
The people of Huruma, the people of Huruma would literally guide me and show me how to cross the marshy grounds between their village and Karura Forest so that I could access the tree nursery that we had established in Karura Forest.
So we've been working with Professor Wangari since then. We started now with the Green Belt movement, with the different private sectors who are interested to come and reconserve Karura again. They came, they hired our community members to come and clear Lantana Kamara, which is a threatening shrub in Karura, so that they could plant indigenous trees which were planted now. And later on, there came an act in the forest, which is Act 2004 and 5, which allows communities living around the forest to participate in the forest. They benefit, and also they benefit the forest.
I'm Charity Modoni Munyasia. I'm the head of Nairobi Forest Conservancy. I came to Nairobi in 2007. I've been working in Rift Valley Province and Western. And when I came to Nairobi in 2007, I had the challenge of managing the Nairobi forests, which are totally different from the other forests in that Nairobi Forest are surrounded by heterogeneous communities, unlike the forests outside the Nairobi city. And by that time, Karura Forest was quite unsafe. Insecurity was the order of the day. We were getting on average a dead body fortnightly. Now, it was at that time now when this lady came to my office wanting to take the horses, and I told her it was insecure for her to go to the forest.
My name is Alice McCare, and I am now the chairman of Friends of Karura Forest, which is a community forest association, which basically means that we are an association which works in partnership with the Kenya Forest Service and include all the communities from around the forest. Originally what happened was that my husband is a diplomat, he's actually the British High Commissioner here, and we came to live out here on a posting. And we were incredibly excited. I've got two young teenagers, daughters, and they were incredibly excited to see that there were some stables near our house. And so they were desperate to ride. And I was looking around for somewhere for them to ride and saw this forest just by our house. So I asked everyone around us what would happen, whether it would be all right for us to go and ride the horses there. And they all said absolutely not. Or they joked and they said, if you do, you will die. They told us lots of horror stories. My neighbour himself had actually one time tried to run through the forest. He was a keen runner, and he had been thrown to the ground and his gold teeth had been pulled out of his mouth. I took the horses, we went riding them, and we went up to the headquarters of the Kenya Forest Service, which is actually in a part of Karura Forest. And I rode up there, and I was lucky enough to meet an amazing lady called Charity.
And she was like, why can't I go to the forest alone? And I told her, you can go to the forest, but escorted by rangers with guns.
So I explained that wouldn't be possible. But as I was leaving, I asked her why it was that a forest in such a central position wasn't accessible for people to use. And I pointed out that in other countries, people such as ourselves would be happy to pay to come into a forest. And at the time, she was angry is the wrong word, but felt very strongly about it. And she banged her hands on the desk and she said, it's so easy for you to walk in here and tell me what I know to be true. But she said, I work for the Kenya Forest Service. There is a moratorium on cutting down trees. We have no other source of income other than subsidies from the government. We are impoverished. She said, you have no idea how frustrating it is for me to sit back and watch this forest get stolen, destroyed, have terrible stories written about it. I am desperate to try and make it better. Please, please help. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, I slightly put it out of my mind when Charity rang me and said, Alice, I think we found a waterfall.
And when she came to the office, we went this time round for real looking for that waterfall. We passed through the caves. We have got 3 caves in Karura. We saw the caves, then we walked by Karura River to the waterfall.
And there was possibly the most beautiful sight I've ever seen, and I've lived all over the world. And it was this devastating waterfall on 3 levels. And I think it was at that point that I absolutely realised that I couldn't walk away from it. Because, as a mother of children, I realised that, every child would give their arms teeth to come and spend some hours there. I mean, it's a paradise. It's a complete Garden of Eden.
Now, when I saw the enthusiasm which she had, I felt God has sent me a ministering angel. And from that moment on, we walked the path together. The next thing I did was to introduce her to the director, Kenya Forest Service, Mr. David K. Bugwa. And the director, we explained to him how we've seen the waterfall and how Alice intends to help us save the forest and who Alice was. And the director was so amazing. He said, Alice and Charity, go ahead and do what you want with the Karura Forest. Even if you want to fence it, go ahead and do it.
Then again, I spoke to Charity about it, and I was very concerned because my great issue was this thing of fools rush in where angels fear to tread. And I felt very strongly that it may be that we could get it to a situation where people like me would benefit from it. But what about the impoverished people who actually lived around the forest and were reliant on it for their livelihoods? And even if these people were attacking people, that's a livelihood if you've got children. And also there were people who had flowers that they were selling along the edge of it and all those sorts of things. And so I said to Charity, I can't be involved in this because I'm convinced that somebody will lose out and I can't be responsible. And she said, no, meet them. So she introduced me, set up a meeting, and at that meeting I met, she brought a representative from that community who is an amazing man by the name of John Cheggy. And John Cheggy is a God-given representative for that village in that he was such a brilliant person to work with right from the beginning. And he said, come and meet my people, come and meet this community. So they organised a meeting and we went there and we went into the chapel that they've got built in the slum, and we arrived and a lot of predominantly men sort of shuffled in with very ragged clothes, terribly yellow eyes, which I understand now is a sign of people who are drinking a lot of changa, illicit alcohol to stop your hunger pangs, and very desperate. And we sat in the church and talked about the forest and what it meant to them and things. And I was just watching. I was aware that as a foreigner, it shouldn't come from me. And we had some great community workers who were there. And so they asked the community about what the forest meant to them, etc. And they said, how would you feel about us fencing it? And to my amazement, they basically were for it. One of the people who were doing the discussions said, but, can I ask you, do you know the people doing the attacking in the forest? And they all said yes. And he said, are they predominantly from your community? And they said yes. And they said, are they all from your community? And they said yes. And then there was this moment and you could feel this question coming. And the gentleman said, is everyone who's doing the attacking in this room? And I sat there and I thought, I wonder how my husband would feel about the fact that I'm sitting here. And there was a few seconds and people looked around and then they said, yeah, no, we're pretty well all here. And then one man leapt to his feet and he said, am I, and he spoke to the pastor there, Pastor Sammy, who's become a great friend. And he said, Pastor Sammy, am I a better man if I attack someone in the forest, steal their mobile phone, sell it and feed my children? Or am I a better man if I go to bed at night listening to my children crying themselves to sleep at night because they have no food? And I hadn't said anything to that point, but at that point I said, look, I have to tell you that if it were my children and they were starving, I would be in that forest right now with a panga, ready to attack anyone that came through. And then another youth jumped to his feet and said, please, find me another means of employment. It's very frightening attacking people in the forest. And there was a silence, and again we listened to this comment, and it was difficult sort of not to laugh at the sort of incongruousness of it. But anyway, from that point onwards, we had this extraordinary relationship with the forest, with that community, Huruma. We had the money, we had the teaching, we had the experts from the other fences that have failed around other forests, and people like Colin Church, who'd done the Aberdare forest, came and helped us. So we had a whole meeting which was concentrated on fencing and the best sort of fencing that would be for here. And then there was one ingredient that we couldn't have done without and that was Christina, who has come in as my vice chair. Christina is someone who not only gets things done and has not only given her life to getting things done, but she gets them done perfectly, every detail. She reads every contract, every letter. She follows it in such an exacting way, in a way that I'm completely useless at. So I run around chatting to people, and she's the one that's put it into place. So suddenly, with John Cheggy from the Huruma community, with Charity, with Christina, who had worked at UNEP and had all that experience, we were able to set up a committee, and that became Friends of Karura Forest, Community Forest Association. had an open day, our first open day, and we took people down to the forest. We took them to the waterfall. And I knew that we were onto a winner when I turned around, and there was an elderly gentleman who came, and he stood by the waterfall, and actually I was standing closer, and I watched him arrive at the base of the waterfall and walk up, and suddenly he had tears streaming down his face. And I went to him and I said, "Are you all right? But what's wrong?" And he said, "This gives me no joy." And I said, Why could this beautiful place not give you joy? And he said, "For me, I look at this, for you, you look at this beautiful waterfall and you think of all the wonderful opportunities you will have to spend here." He said, "For me, I look at this waterfall. I think of the wedding anniversaries I missed here. I think of the walks that I could have had with my children. I think of the times I could have brought my grandchildren here." He said, "My house is less than 2 kilometres from this very place. I had no idea it was here." And he wrote us a large cheque.
On one side, we do want more and more people to come into the forest because we need the revenue from the gates to be able to pay for all the running costs. But on the other side, I mean, I come from a science background and I'm very interested in the forest as forest. So I would like to see with time the forest being back to the indigenous forest it was originally. I don't know if you know that a big portion of the forest is not indigenous, because in the time of the colonial time, the colonial cut the indigenous trees to plant eucalyptus, araucarias and cypress trees, because they needed the fuel for the railway. So a lot of the forest, the indigenous forest, was cut. As a matter of fact, we only have about 25% of indigenous forest left in Karura Forest. So what we would like to do, and I'm particularly interested, is in trying to slowly restore the indigenous trees in Karura Forest.
The other huge bonus we had was that there was a property, an old recreation club owned by Shell. They had a 14-year lease left to run. Because it had been so dangerous to come and use the club, people had stopped coming. So I went to see the CEO of Shell, and I said to him, "Look, I would love for you not to sell this off." And he said, "Alice, what we need is a safe pair of hands. We can't continue to own this because of the health and safety reasons. We need to look for somewhere to put them." And because of this group that we had together, I was able to show him a safe pair of hands. And since then, we've entered into a partnership with Shell, with the Oshwal, which is a fantastic community here who are very environmentally aware, with ourselves, with the Kenya Forest Service, with the Greenbelt, to actually change that building, as I say, into a forest education centre. And even now, that works are in process, but it has become the centre of this forest.
We believe Karura is going to be a super ecotourism center, and the Nairobians can enjoy it, and even visitors from abroad. We have the Kenya Tourist Board who are also helping us in marketing Karura, and we ask everybody else to assist us in marketing Karura. Is a place to be.
Well, I think that the future of Karura is, the sky is the limit. I can only imagine that 10, 50, 100 years from now, I hope that Karura will continue to be an inspiration and will continue to be a haven for all those people who love nature.
Now the fence has gone in, the security is in, the community are happy, and we continue to work with them on different projects such as fish ponds, honey plants, collecting the dead wood, etc. I do believe that it is going to be a success into the future, because every person that comes here falls in love with it